Hi everyone and welcome. My name's Neil Ward-Dutton and I work for IDC and I lead our AI and also our automation practices in Europe. And I'm here today talking to you about the new Business Automation Toolkit. So let's get started. First off, I want to talk a bit about digital transformation. This is a topic that's been around for a long time. And at IDC, we've been covering and watching this space for many, many years. But something really, really interesting and important is happening. And that is that as we've been tracking the progression of digital transformation and the power of the digital economy, if you like, the proportion of GDP that comes from digital products and services, we've started to see a real acceleration. And in fact, at the moment, we're predicting that by 2023, over half of the GDP in Europe, as an example, will be made up of value that comes from digital products and services. And we're seeing a very similar pattern in regions around the world. Now, you might wonder why that's important, and it's only important as backdrop, but you'll see I keep coming back to this theme as we talk. The first thing that's important to note, though, about this is that as a result, we're finding that through interaction after interaction, through survey after survey, CEOs are telling us that they are under real pressure to deliver value from digital transformation. And by that, I don't mean just setting up an innovation lab or something like that. This is about delivering real value at scale from digital technologies, products and services, and transformation of the internals of how an organization works. It's about doing that at scale and doing that with some speed and with some significant investment. So this is a real change to how we've seen almost like the early game of this space happening over the last 3-4 years. We're now seeing a real acceleration and CEOs really under pressure to drive real value at scale. And of course, that's just the kind of the far backdrop. Of course, the other thing that's now being overlaid on top of this, which is of course very top of mind for pretty much anybody that we might speak to, is the whole COVID-19 crisis. And of course, I can't go through a presentation at this point without mentioning that. But it really builds on the digital transformation story, because what we're seeing is that organizations are seeing that in order to respond effectively, not just in the immediate term, but also in the longer term, they're actually accelerating, many of them, their digital transformation plans. And what we're seeing is that organizations commonly have three things they want to focus on. They want to focus on intelligence in their organization. One common way this comes through is through a reappraisal of what supply chains look like, and the realization that often supply chains are still largely operated on spreadsheets and pen and paper and phone calls and faxes in many cases. And we're seeing a real groundswell of demand for digitization of supply chains and the driving of digital intelligence through those. We're also seeing organizations take quite aggressive approaches to appraising how they can apply more automation. But this automation isn't just about efficiency, and we'll come back to that point as well in a minute. It's also about reducing friction, fundamentally driving agility. So by taking those friction points out of processes and decision making, we're able to link activities up more effectively, more seamlessly, and that reduces friction and enables us to change faster. So it's not just about squeezing cost out. In fact, in many cases, it may not even be about squeezing cost out. It's about being able to change, reconfigure, pivot more quickly. And lastly, when we look at CX, customer experience, fundamentally, the starting point of this is about delivering faster, more effective, more transparent experiences in more and more different kinds of venues, in more flexible environments, if you like. And all of those things we see are really top of mind for organizations. As I said, as they start to try and not only get past the immediate crisis, but start to think about how to position themselves for the end of this year, into next year, and the year after. How to position themselves for the new normal, if you like. And You know, as a response to all of this change, and we are seeing a lot of change, IDC has created what we call this framework called Future of Intelligence, which is fundamentally trying to describe the new ways in which organizations are trying to apply intelligence to make themselves more effective. And I'm just going to quickly lead you through this because it's all pretty relevant, and I think will also help you think more broadly about how intelligence needs to get driven into your operations and the way you deliver value to customers. So there's three core capabilities at the heart of this framework. The first is the one I'm going to talk about here at the top, which is the ability to synthesize information. This is fundamentally about having a capability in your organization that allows you to bring data together and information together from many, many different sources, not just from transactional systems, but from event streams, maybe from your supply chain, from social media, from mobile networks, from system logs, from application logs, from connected devices, connected infrastructure out in the field. It's really about recognizing the breadth and the diversity of data types and data kind of vehicles and connectivity types that are out there, and realizing that as you're able to bring more and more information together, that gives you the fuel to drive more and more insight. So that's about the ability to bring information together and synthesize it. The second one I'm going to talk about is delivery of insights at scale. Fundamentally, that is about, once you've got the information, being able to drive decision making and action taking from that most effectively and most quickly in the most in the kind of broadest set of possible contexts. And this is what I'm going to dig down into specifically in the rest of this presentation. But it's not enough just to have the ability to gather lots of information from lots of places and from then to be able to make decisions and take actions based on that. To really drive a kind of future view of intelligence into your organization, drive sustainable value over the long term, of course, we have to embrace the fact, and it's no more obvious than it is now, embrace the fact that environments, businesses, circumstances change. So this isn't a static picture. And so the third key capability that's here in our framework is the capacity to learn. Fundamentally, this is about feedback. It's about taking those decisions and those actions and exploiting the power of digital technology to then understand how those change the situation for the organization and how we can continue to improve. So what kinds of decisions are most effective? What kinds of actions are most effective? How do we maybe need to improve those? And what kinds of data do we now need to bring in and reconfigure? How can we learn as an organization how to apply insights more effectively in more places? That's what the capacity to learn is all about. And it's only when you bring all three of these capabilities together, the ability to synthesize information, the ability to deliver insights at scale, and the capacity to learn, it's only when we bring all of those together that we get a real kind of forward-facing organization that's embracing the future of intelligence. All right, so having done that, as I said, I'm going to dig into this in one further level of detail. And specifically, I'm going to focus on the delivery of insights at scale. Now, here's a graphic that shows how organizations, the different pathways they can use to deliver insights at scale. I'm not going to go through all of the segments on this chart one by one. This would take me half an hour just by itself. But what I want to call out is a higher level view of this, if you like. And the reason I'm doing this is because at the moment, particularly, as we've seen so much excitement around automation technologies over the last year or two, it's easy to get seduced into thinking that, well, the real way to deliver benefit from intelligence and insight is just by automating stuff, using that data and insight to automate things and to drive predictions right into action and do everything without humans. But of course, the real world is not like that. You can't just automate everything. There are some things you can automate, absolutely. But in reality, when you look at the breadth of different use cases that will exist inside your organization, it can't just be about automation. And in fact, there is this spectrum of pathway choices that you have. At the bottom of our spectrum here, if you like, it could just be delivering value in a use case, could just be about providing better, more focused, more contextual information to a human decision maker, so they have exactly information they need at their fingertips to make the right decision right now. It could be about providing more guidance around that information, or indeed making predictions, maybe in a contact center, throwing up on a screen a prediction about how likely this customer who's just called in is to accept a certain kind of offer, or maybe how likely they are to churn because we know we've had problems with them in the past. We can actually start to drive personalization also, so making personalized offers to people, personalizing pricing, doing all that kind of really dynamic tuning of information and configuration right in the moment. It might be about making recommendations in the moment, in the flow of work. And ultimately, we get to the ability to completely automate a task or a process. But delivery of the value from insight is on a spectrum. And when you look at all the different use cases at your disposal, it can't just be about simple automation. You have to consider what's right for that use case. And this is one reason why you have to take a strategic view, a holistic view of automation technology choices when you start to look at how you can drive value from the power of intelligence in your organization. So that really comes back to right at the beginning of the presentation when I talk about the new business automation toolkit. By taking a strategic, holistic view, that immediately then brings you into a realization that you can't just default down into thinking, I can automate this. You have to have a whole toolkit at your disposal that allows you to apply different tactics to drive the right value from the right use case. All right, let's dig into this a little bit more. And when organizations start to think more holistically and strategically about this, and again, thinking back to the point I just made around how we're seeing, as a response to this crisis, organizations focusing on CX, customer experience, focusing on intelligence, and focusing on automation. What's really important to realize is that all of these things are connected. And this is another driver for the need to think kind of more broadly, more strategically about the value of automation and how you apply it. So let's just dig into this piece by piece. When organizations think about digitally transforming, and that's even true now in the current crisis, one of the first places they typically start is around customer interactions. It's about, okay, can we deliver more personalized, more meaningful products and services across more channels at the right time? Can we be more transparent about how we do it so that people know, for example, when to expect a delivery? Can we add more value to our service by providing insight and intelligence in that service? Fundamentally, that's really about, it's about intelligence. It's about integration often. It's about integrating lots of different capabilities from the back end to deliver that, personalized, transparent, convenient service and the right time, right place kind of interaction. But of course, what sits behind all of this, it's easy to focus on the front end, right? It's easy to focus on a mobile app or a really good website, or maybe indeed a great combination of a good mobile app, a great website, and a great call center. But what sits behind all those things, they don't just exist in a vacuum. What sits behind them is a whole load of operations. And particularly for organizations that have been around for more than 5-10 years, their operations are dispersed. They're quite often siloed. There's different kind of centers of gravity and different ownership kind of fiefdoms behind all these. And what we see is that if we really want to deliver excellence at the front end, if you like, we have to have everything lined up behind that experience, because any chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And when you really start to think about what enables great customer journeys, it's really about delivering what you might call this kind of digital thread that gets woven through an organization's operations. And what happens is the customer, whether they know it or not, the customer and their data and the transactions that support their experience, they're flowing from backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards through your operations. And maybe that means not only your internal capability, but parts of your operations that you've outsourced or offshored, or maybe some features that are enabled through your partners or your suppliers. Having this digital thread, this ability to join up different systems, different operations, different transactions, different applications, this ability is absolutely crucial. If you don't do it, you may as well have done nothing at all. I always like to share the, I guess, a slightly silly example of an organization that perhaps has spent, millions on creating the most awesome front-end mobile app, but then customer onboarding is broken because it hasn't been given enough attention. So a customer maybe downloads the mobile app, signs up for the service, and then they're not able to be fully onboarded for like 2 days, 3 days. Well, you've kind of given with one hand and you've taken away with the other. So isn't that maybe worse than creating the mobile app in the first place? Or maybe the problem is more around billing. You've got a great front end, but you can't bill customers effectively. Or if the customer has 5 products, you send them 5 different bills. These kinds of issues are easy to overlook, and it does happen time and time again. You have to have this end-to-end picture already in your mind. And this is another, as I said, clear driver for this end-to-end view, this strategic view of what automation needs to look like. And it's not just about the digital thread, it's also about moments of truth. As you deliver all of the things that need to sit behind a customer experience, you encounter lots and lots of moments of truth, critical decisions that need to be made quickly, transparently, and in context to get things right for a customer. You may not necessarily see them as directly impacting the customer, but often there will be an indirect impact. Every choice that gets made along this pathway can be crucial. And it's really super important that decisions are made and actions are taken with the right information. So they need to be contextual. Decisions need to be efficient and effective, and they need to be transparent. So when you look at all this together, you can see that focusing on digitization of products and services can't be done by itself. The domains, the considerations, if you like, around digitization across products and services and decisions and processes, they're all interconnected. They're all interlinked. You can't do one without the other. So I've already kind of given you a kind of big trail for this, right? Along the way, I've said multiple times, you can't take an approach which just focuses purely on simplistic automation. You know what? RPA, which is the sexy topic of the moment, is sexy for a reason. It can do really cool things, right? There are challenging problems that organizations can solve really quickly and often quite cheaply with RPA. Brilliant for taking drudgery, routine, administrative work away from people and connecting the dots in some situations, right? So closing those air gaps that often exist, particularly around legacy applications. So RPA is cool, RPA is sexy, but it's not everything. And what I'm trying to show here on this chart is that there are 4 main ingredients that we see in a kind of modern business automation toolkit. And there are others actually, but these are the 4 main ones that we think are really important. And I've already talked a bit about RPA. Great at enabling you to automate certain tasks and do kind of gap filling, if you like. AI, of course, another very, very sexy topic, and for good reason. There are lots of really interesting and useful things you can do around AI. Many of those are actually in conjunction with RPA. For example, very common use cases using document understanding that you can get from implementing AI to do kind of upstream activity automation in front of kind of routine admin that you might do in a back office. So, for example, you get inbound customer communications of lots of different types. You use AI to categorize those documents, to extract information, understand what they're about, understand who or what needs to process those documents, and then drive, automated changes to back-end systems in line with those requests. So whether that's, for example, a change of address, some kind of policy update, a complaint that needs to be handled through a case management system, you can often use RPA and AI together to do that kind of work. And AI can also be used to drive really interesting capabilities in a broader automation strategy. For example, predictions and personalization in the flow of work for human experts. But by themselves, they aren't enough. By themselves, they can't create that digital thread. By themselves, they can't really support those moments of truth. And going back a few slides, by themselves, they can't give you that full spectrum of pathway types to delivering value from insight. They can help you with one extreme end, the automation end, but what they can't do is really give you that whole spectrum of choices that you need across lots of different use cases. And this is where some of the maybe less sexy stuff, but the really important stuff comes into the picture. This is about leveraging existing technologies, workflow, process automation, integration platforms. These things are also absolutely crucial parts of your armory, of your toolkit. A kind of trivial example of where workflow adds value here is if you have, for example, a whole army, or even just a small company of bots doing automation on back-end systems, and there are problems with those. Maybe the back-end system changes unexpectedly. Maybe there's some other kind of issue in the environment, and bots start failing, throwing exceptions. Well, you know what? You can collect all those exceptions in a directory or write them out to a spreadsheet or something like that. And then some poor devil has to go and work through that spreadsheet and figure out what the heck they have to do. Or you can use a workflow system and drive those exceptions into a queue for manual processing. And what's really cool, of course, is that once you start to see workflow as an environment where you can manage exceptions, you can go way beyond the simplistic case where you just chuck everything in a queue and a homogeneous team tries to work through it. You can start to drive exceptions to lots of different queues, lots of different teams. You can start to monitor the effectiveness of exception handling. You can do all kinds of interesting stuff around looking for patterns in exceptions and finding opportunities to further improve the process. When you start to bring these different pieces together, you can see lots of ways that they really add value to each other. And I want to just take this one step further, because it's maybe easy to look at this picture and say, oh, wow, you know what? This actually looks quite complicated, right? If I'm really going to embrace this whole toolkit, I'm going to need to have my people learn lots of new skills. It's going to be a big investment, right? Well, the good news is that there's two words which are really revolutionizing this whole space. And the two words are low code. You know, often when people hear about low code, they think principally of application development. And that application development might be kind of about workflow applications, or it may be about more generic, general applications, transactional systems. But actually, when you think about it, this idea of low code, using kind of high productivity tools, very graphical, lots of point and click stuff, where most of what you're doing is configuration, not coding, where you can code when you absolutely have to, but when that coding is very carefully managed and separated from all of your kind of more high productivity work. Low code is not just about app dev. It's not just about building net new apps. Actually, low code is what powers a lot of what's going on in RPA. When you see most RPA environments, they are very graphical. They're about customization and configuration, with some coding, yes, when it absolutely is necessary. When you look at AI, when you look at how that space is evolving, one of the big things that's happening right now is something called auto ML, auto machine learning. Fundamentally, it's a low-code environment for creating machine learning algorithms with a minimum of kind of deep technical knowledge required, where the platform itself basically drives a lot of the intelligence and a lot of the configuration for you. So also, when you look at integration platforms, when you look at how modern integration platforms enable people to build connections between systems. Again, a lot of that is increasingly low code. It's increasingly graphical. It's based on configuration, not coding. And the real power of low code is not just in its interestingness as a cool new way to do things. It's fundamentally about participation. It's about inclusivity. And it's about enabling you to move faster in a more agile kind of way. So the more you can leverage tools that have a lower demand on technical training, the more easy it is to bring more diverse teams with more varied and interesting and useful experiences together to collaborate, to build solutions quickly and iteratively. Low code is about participation. It's about democratization. And fundamentally, it's an engine for you to drive much further, much faster in your automation efforts. Now, I'm just going to kind of circle back briefly here to the digital transformation story and the COVID-19 crisis. Because what we're starting to see is that leading organizations are really looking at how automation can not only drive efficiency, but how it can also enable their operations to be more resilient. And really, actually, when you think about it, it's quite simple. And low code is part of the picture. To just step back in time a few years, think back, if you've been around for long enough, think back 15 years or so. Automation projects in businesses were often very expensive. They required expensive tools, expensive people, lots of time. And so what happened was that often they would only get applied to the most complicated high-end problems. And any other problem just wouldn't really be addressed because automation technology at the time wasn't really able to address it. Not technically able, but kind of almost economically able, if you like. That's where the problem was. It was fundamentally about ease of use and cost. Now, when you look at low code and when you look at cloud platforms, look at subscription-based pay-as-you-go type services, it starts to really fundamentally change the equation. And what we see is that there are three ways in which that old school approach to business automation has been changed by changing economics, changing delivery models, and so on over the last 5 years. So first off, what IDC calls third platform digital technologies. Fundamentally, this is about the cloud, but it's also about mobile and to an extent around social as well. This is about the ability to leverage new platforms to enable more people to connect to each other and get things done from more places. So in the old days, when we built systems to automate things, those had to be built to make very, very clear presumptions about what work would get done and when and in what order and where humans were involved, who would be involved and where they would need to be. Often they would need to be sitting, typing at a computer in an office to make a change or to drive some action. Think about cloud, mobile, social platforms and so on. That's revolutionized that landscape. Second one is, as I've already talked about at some length, the ability now to drive analytics, machine learning and AI right into the flow of work, to drive prediction, recommendation right into the environment where people are working. And this means that even when you have a workforce that is maybe compromised, where maybe some of your experts can't be at work when they want to be or where they want to be, by having systems that learn and that can start to learn from the actions of the best, what you start to be able to do is drive predictions and recommendations to everyone that model the actions and the behaviors of the best. So you start to build an environment where you have more resiliency in your ability to drive decision making and action taking. Fundamentally, part of the value here is about making everybody as good as the best. And even when you have a workforce that's compromised, being able to drive great outcomes consistently at scale. The third thing is, again, about these low-code, no-code tools. This allows you to move more quickly, pivot more quickly, drive more value, be more agile. When you bring all of these things together, you start to see that automation toolkits as they exist now are really nothing like the propositions we had 15 years ago. They really do enable organizations to drive more people to get involved, to drive more intelligence and value out of their work, and to have people work together with intelligent systems to drive outcomes more and more flexibly than they've ever been able to do before. So whether your people are, unexpectedly unavailable, whether they're having to work from home, whether people have to be on the move, or whether they're normally on the move and they can't be on the move, the automation systems we can bring into play now really give us so much more resilience. And that's a crucial part of the value you need to be thinking about. I'm going to close out briefly by talking about how you make all this really fly. When we talk about lots of different elements of the toolkit, and when we talk about democratization and participation, so enabling lots of business teams to go and start maybe getting involved in building their own apps, driving their own value, that can be really amazing. But if you're not careful, ultimately you can end up in a sticky situation. If you have, if you like, lots of federated control, federated activity, and you don't have any central coordination, you can end up with chaos. You can end up with situations where people are reinventing the wheel, where people are not communicating effectively, where they're really not able to scale effectively, where you're not able to reuse common IP. And a center of excellence, of course, is a great way to do this. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I just want to call out that fundamentally, it's tempting to say that there is one way you must build your COE, your center of excellence. And the truth is there is not. The truth is you have to build a COE that fits your own broader operating model. What works for you is not necessarily what's going to work for a company down the street, or your competitor halfway around the world, or your partner or your supplier. A COE fundamentally has to fit the way that you're set up in terms of power structures, in terms of where technology gets built, in terms of who has money, in terms of who need convincing. Having said that, though, we commonly find a whole variety of functions that get applied inside a COE context. And although there's always variations around precisely what mix of capabilities gets deployed, gets operationalized, if you like, at the core is typically implementation knowledge. One shared place where what works gets written down and then gets shared and gets used. So at the core, I would always recommend of an automation COE, a modern automation COE, you need to have some kind of repository of implementation knowledge about what works for your organization. Now, what we often find around that is a function around promotion and comms, fundamentally like an internal marketing exercise, driving success stories. So when a team delivers great results, taking that, making a great story out of that and sharing it around the organization, or helping that team share its own success story, doing it in a consistent and an appropriate way. Sometimes you'll see COEs having their own platform hosting all the platforms centrally, and individual implementation teams, essentially getting access to those centralized platforms. But that may not always be appropriate. It may be more appropriate for your environment to have platform hosting federated and dispersed. Likewise, some COEs centralize technology licensing and vendor relations. And what they say is that if you want to work with vendor X or vendor Y, you have to come through us because we've negotiated favorable licensing terms, or whatever the argument might be. What you very, very often find is change management, that function which helps to drive consistency over how change gets managed in automation over the long term. And that is a very, very common feature. And there's a very good reason, which is that within an individual implementation, you may not get very much change. That means that in an implementation team, you may not always build up enough expertise about how to manage change effectively. A COE, which looks across lots of different initiatives, can start to build experience very quickly about how to effectively manage change at scale over the long term, and then can lend that experience to different teams. So to wrap that up, you do need a COE, certainly if you're going to move beyond 1, 2, 3 implementations. That COE is not going to be a cookie cutter implementation. It's going to need to be what works for your organization. Let's close this out by wrapping up with some key messages. How do you drive success? Firstly, stay in control. It's easy to get carried away with what vendors might be telling you. Don't let hungry technology vendors push you down a path that doesn't necessarily make sense to you. Build your own strategy. Understand the use cases and drive a conversation with your suppliers and your partners around what those priority use cases are. Don't necessarily let them lead the conversation. Have a clear and consistent approach to value assessment that helps you understand how to prioritize those use cases. Remember that automation is change. It's changing people's work environments. It's changing how people do what they do. You have to be, if you want to get real long-term value, long-term success, you have to figure out ways to bring users right into your conversation, right from the very beginning and all the way through your process and at the end too. You have to find and develop champions who can help you drive change at scale. As I said, if you see more than a small handful of opportunities, start to think about building a center of excellence. Implement a model that works for your organization, and it will not be something that's off the shelf. I can almost guarantee it. Fourthly, and lastly, explore the picture beyond RPA. RPA can be a great way to get you started, but by itself, ultimately, when you start to look at automation strategy and you start to look at different kinds of use cases, you will see that RPA is not enough. You need to bring AI into the picture. You need to bring workflow into the picture, and you'll probably need to bring some other kinds of integration technology into the picture too. And with that, I'll finish. Thanks very much for watching.